There are stories that begin with a single hero stepping onto a lonely road, and there are stories that begin with a kingdom rising or a battle already waiting. But the voyage of the Argo began with something quieter. It began with the patient shaping of timber beneath careful hands, with the scent of fresh pine carried down from the slopes of Mount Pelion, where tall trees had stood through countless seasons listening to the mountain winds. Before there was a crew, before there was a quest, before the sea itself knew the name of the ship that would cross it, there was wood waiting to become something greater than itself. Argus, the master shipwright whose skill was spoken of with admiration across Greece, walked among those trees with the eye of one who understood that every piece of timber carried its own hidden purpose. He did not hurry his choosing. He laid his hand upon the trunks, listening as much as looking, searching for wood that had grown straight beneath the sun and remained strong through winter storms. A ship was not merely assembled, it was persuaded into being. Yet even the finest craftsman did not work alone. Athena herself came quietly to the building of the vessel, not with thunder or dazzling light, but with the calm certainty that always surrounded thoughtful work. The goddess of wisdom understood that great journeys often depended upon careful beginnings. She guided the hands of Argus when balance mattered, when one curve of the hull needed to answer another, when every beam had to carry not only weight, but hope. From the sacred grove of Dodona, she brought a single piece of living oak, a beam unlike any other in the world. The ancient tree from which it came had listened for generations to the voice of Zeus carried through whispering leaves. Even after it became part of the ship's prow, something of that sacred listening remained within the wood. It was said that the beam could speak when danger approached, offering quiet counsel to those wise enough to hear. So the Argo became more than a vessel. She possessed the warmth of living timber, the strength of mountain forests, the blessing of Athena, and the mysterious voice of the oldest oak in Greece. The sea had carried many boats before her, but none quite like this one. Every plank seemed to breathe with quiet purpose. Every oarlock waited patiently for the rhythm it had not yet learned. Resting upon the shore beside the blue waters of Iolcos, the ship seemed almost aware that a remarkable destiny was approaching. It was there that Jason first stood before her. He was still young, broad-shouldered and steady-eyed, though there was little of the boastful warrior about him. His life had not unfolded as he had been born to expect. His father, Aeson, rightful king of Iolcos, had been driven from power by Peleus, whose fear of prophecy had shaped every choice he made. Jason himself had been carried away as an infant and raised in the quiet care of the wise centaur Chiron upon Mount Pelion, where he learned patience before ambition, judgment before command. When he finally returned to claim the kingdom that should have been his, Peleus did not deny his birthright outright. Instead, he offered a task so impossible that it seemed certain to remove the young challenger forever. Jason must sail to the distant kingdom of Colchis beyond the familiar seas, and bring back the Golden Fleece. The fleece had hung for generations within a sacred grove at the eastern edge of the known world, guarded by a dragon that never slept. Between Greece and that distant shore lay unknown waters, dangerous islands, hostile kings, and wonders few believed truly existed. Jason accepted without anger. Some thought this courage, others thought it innocence. Yet beneath his calm expression lay another understanding. No single mortal, however gifted, could accomplish such a journey alone. So messengers traveled across Greece. They carried not promises of wealth nor guarantees of safety, but the invitation to attempt something that no generation had yet imagined possible. The responses came slowly at first, then they came from every direction. Heracles arrived like a mountain choosing to walk among men. Even standing quietly upon the shore, his strength seemed almost impossible to measure. Yet beneath that immense power rested a surprising gentleness, especially toward those weaker than himself. The great lion's skin hung across his shoulders, and his mighty club rested easily in one hand, though he carried it without any desire to display his strength. Orpheus came carrying only his lyre. Where Heracles possessed unmatched force, Orpheus possessed harmony. His music could calm frightened hearts, soften fierce tempers, and even persuade rivers to linger in their course. Around evening fires, while waves whispered against the shore, his quiet melodies would become as valuable to the crew as any sword. Castor and Pollux arrived together, so alike in loyalty that they seemed almost two expressions of one spirit. Castor excelled with horses and every skill of the disciplined warrior. Pollux, son of Zeus, was unmatched in boxing and carried within him something of the calm confidence of the heavens themselves. Neither sought glory apart from the other. Then came Atalanta, swift-footed huntress of Arcadia. Some wondered whether a woman should join so dangerous a voyage, but those who knew her deeds asked no such question. She had hunted the Caledonian boar beside the greatest heroes of Greece and earned their respect through skill rather than favor. Her bow rested lightly across her shoulder, her eyes already measuring distant horizons. Zeus and Calais descended almost like the wind itself. Sons of Boreas, the north wind, they moved with an effortless grace that reminded others of seabirds gliding above open water. Their presence seemed to promise that even the restless air had chosen to aid the voyage. Many more followed. Some were mighty warriors. Some were gifted sailors. Some possessed remarkable wisdom, healing hands, quick judgment, or unmatched endurance. Jason greeted each one not as a rival to be surpassed, nor merely as another name added to the crew, but as a necessary part of something larger than any single hero could become. He understood that leadership did not require being the strongest man upon the shore. It required recognizing the strength within others and giving every gift its proper place. At last the morning arrived. The wind carried the scent of salt across the harbor. Gentle waves lapped against the waiting hull. Families gathered upon the shore, their faces bright with hope and shadowed by uncertainty. Some embraced sons they feared they might never see again. Others stood silently, trusting that words would only disturb the fragile peace of farewell. One by one, the Argonauts stepped aboard. The oars settled into their locks. The sail stirred softly as the first breath of wind found its waiting canvas. Jason placed one hand upon the smooth rail of the Argo, feeling the quiet life within the sacred timber. Ahead stretched only the shimmering horizon, where sea and sky met so gently that neither seemed to end nor begin. Then, with a single measured command, the first oars entered the water, and the great ship began to glide away from the familiar shore, carrying her extraordinary company into the wide breathing silence of the open sea, where the rhythm of the waves slowly gathered around them like the opening lines of a story that had only just begun. The first oars entered the water, and the wide breathing silence of the open sea slowly gathered around the Argo, as though it had been waiting for her all along. At first, every movement aboard the ship carried the careful attention of something new. The oars did not yet fall into perfect rhythm. Some dipped a heartbeat too soon, others a little too late, and the sea answered each uneven stroke with gentle splashes against the polished hull. No one spoke of it. Great undertakings were not born in perfect harmony. They found it, one patient moment after another. Morning light unfolded slowly across the water, the sails filled with a mild northern wind, their woven cloth breathing softly above the deck. The smell of pine tar mixed with the sharp scent of salt, while gulls circled briefly overhead before turning back toward the familiar coastline. Soon even the birds disappeared behind them. Only the sea remained. Jason often stood near the prow during those first days, his hand resting upon the sacred oak that Athena had placed there. He found comfort in looking ahead rather than behind. The horizon revealed nothing, yet somehow promised everything. A leader, he had learned from Chiron, did not need to know every answer before beginning a journey. He only needed the wisdom to continue toward the purpose when certainty had not yet arrived. Around him, the Argonauts slowly became more than a gathering of remarkable individuals. They became companions. Heracles rowed without complaint, though every pull of his oar carried enough strength for two ordinary men. Yet he was careful never to overpower the others. His immense hands adjusted naturally to the rhythm of the crew, understanding that a ship moved fastest when every oar worked together. Strength, he knew, achieved little if it ignored harmony. Orpheus often waited until evening before lifting his lyre. As darkness settled over the sea and the stars quietly appeared one by one, his fingers awakened melodies that seemed almost older than language itself. The music drifted gently across the water, and even the waves appeared to soften beneath its quiet influence. Men who had scarcely spoken during the day found themselves smiling without knowing why. Homesickness became lighter. Fear retreated into the distance. No command from Jason united the crew more gently than Orpheus's songs. Castor devoted himself to every practical task aboard the ship. He checked the rigging, adjusted the ropes, and patiently taught those less experienced in the ways of the sea. Pollux, meanwhile, possessed the easy confidence of one who never needed to prove himself. His laughter came readily, easing small disagreements before they could become lasting resentments. Atalanta remained watchful. While others rested, her eyes wandered constantly across the coastline and distant waters. Years spent hunting had taught her that danger often revealed itself first through the smallest changes. A bird suddenly taking flight, an unfamiliar ripple upon calm water, a silence where there should have been sound. More than once she quietly pointed toward reefs or hidden rocks long before anyone else had noticed them. Jason valued these moments. He listened more than he spoke. Each hero carried a gift that no other possessed, and leadership meant recognizing those gifts before pride obscured them. There were decisions only Heracles could make through strength, moments only Orpheus could soothe through music, dangers only Atalanta could foresee through careful observation. Jason's task was not to replace their talents, but to weave them together as skillfully as a master weaver joined many threads into a single cloth. The days settled into a peaceful rhythm. Sunrise brought cool air and quiet determination. Midday filled the sea with shimmering light that danced endlessly across the waves. At evening, the western sky glowed with soft shades of gold and crimson before surrendering itself to deep blue. During the night, the stars became their faithful companions. Many of the sailors had never before ventured so far from home. Lying upon the deck beneath the constellations, they listened as older mariners named the bright figures above them. Orion strode across the heavens. The Great Bear circled slowly around the northern sky. The Pleiades shimmered like scattered jewels. Jason often wondered how many generations of sailors had trusted these same lights to guide them safely through darkness. The sea possessed its own kind of wisdom. It taught patience. It accepted no haste. Every destination was reached one steady stroke at a time. After many peaceful days, a dark shape slowly emerged upon the horizon. At first it seemed little more than another cloud resting upon the edge of the world. As the Argo drew nearer, hills rose from the mist, followed by green forests and sheltered harbors where the sea lay calm beneath gentle winds. They had reached Lemnos. The island carried an unusual stillness. No fishing boats hurried from its shores. No men called across the harbor. Instead, women gathered along the waterfront, watching the approaching ship with expressions in which hope mingled with cautious disbelief. Their queen was Hypsipyle. She came to greet the newcomers not with weapons, but with quiet dignity. There was kindness in her face, though behind it rested an unmistakable sadness that time itself had not entirely softened. As the Argonauts were welcomed ashore, the story of the island slowly unfolded. Long before the Argo had appeared upon the horizon, the women of Lemnos had fallen under the anger of Aphrodite after neglecting the goddess's worship. strange curse had driven their husbands away from them until love within the island had withered into bitterness. The men had taken foreign wives, abandoning those who had once shared their homes. What followed became one of the darkest memories in Greek myth. Consumed by grief and rage, the women rose together in a single terrible night. When dawn came, almost every man upon Lemnos was gone. Only Hypsipyle had secretly spared her aged father, hiding him from the slaughter and helping him escape across the sea. Since that time, the island had belonged only to women. Fields were still tended. Homes remained warm. Children no longer laughed in the streets. The harbours waited in silence. The arrival of the Argo felt almost like the return of spring after a season that had lasted for years. The women offered generous hospitality, tables filled with fresh bread, olives, figs, honey, roasted fish, and cool wine welcomed the weary travellers. Soft beds replaced the hard wooden deck. Laughter gradually returned to halls that had known only quiet conversation for far too long. For the first time since leaving Iolcos, the crew found themselves surrounded not by uncertainty, but by comfort. Days became pleasantly easy. Then they quietly became weeks. The sea continued to breathe beyond the harbour, patient as ever, while the Argo rested motionless against the wooden piers. Even the sacred ship seemed content to sleep beneath the warm island sun. Many of the Argonauts began to wonder whether the urgency of their quest had ever truly been as great as they had first believed. Only one hero refused to leave the ship. Heracles remained aboard the Argo, sitting alone beneath the mast as evening shadows lengthened across the quiet harbour. He watched the sea instead of the city, his great club resting beside him, his thoughts fixed upon the distant eastern horizon. He understood something the others had begun, almost without noticing, to forget. The Golden Fleece was still waiting, and beyond the peaceful waters of Lemnos, the long voyage had scarcely begun. The Golden Fleece was still waiting beyond the peaceful waters of Lemnos, and Heracles alone kept his eyes upon the distant horizon. Each evening he watched the sun disappear into the sea, while the Argo rested quietly at her moorings. The ship had not been built to remain in a sheltered harbour. Her timbers seemed almost restless, rising and falling gently with each tide, as though remembering the purpose for which Athena had blessed her. At last Heracles sought out Jason. He spoke without anger, for he respected the young leader too much for harsh words. "The sea is patient," he said quietly. "It will wait for us, but we must not mistake comfort for completion." Jason understood at once. The warmth of Lemnos had become a gentle kind of forgetting. The laughter, the friendship, and the peace had slowly loosened the grip of the quest upon every heart, including his own. The following morning he gathered the crew upon the shore. No speeches were needed. Each Argonaut already knew why they had crossed the sea. They embraced their hosts with sincere gratitude, for the women of Lemnos had offered kindness when none was required. Queen Hypsipyle stood beside the harbour as the ropes were cast off, her expression carrying both hope and sadness. The Argo slipped quietly from the sheltered bay, and the island slowly faded into the blue distance behind them. The sea welcomed them back with a steady wind. Before long, another coastline appeared, green beneath the morning sun. It belonged to the Doliones, whose wise king, Cyzicus, greeted the travelers with open hands. Hospitality was sacred among the Greeks, and nowhere was it offered more generously than here. Great fires were lit upon the shore. Fresh bread and roasted meat filled the tables. Stories passed between guests and hosts as though they had known one another for years instead of hours. King Cyzicus admired the famous heroes gathered aboard the Argo, while the Argonauts found themselves equally impressed by the kindness and dignity of their young host. When favorable winds returned, warm farewells were exchanged, and the Argo once again put out to sea. Yet the sea is never entirely predictable. As darkness settled across the water, a fierce storm swept suddenly out of the north. The wind drove the ship back toward the very coast they had just departed, but rain and darkness concealed every familiar landmark. Neither the Argonauts nor the Doliones recognized one another beneath the black sky. Each believed strangers had landed upon their shores. Weapons were seized. Confusion became battle. The clash of bronze echoed through the night while frightened voices called across the wind. Jason fought bravely, never imagining that those before him had shared bread with him only hours earlier. Somewhere in the darkness, King Cyzicus also entered the struggle, defending his people with equal courage. Only when dawn finally broke did the terrible truth reveal itself. The storm had made enemies of friends. King Cyzicus lay among the fallen. For a long while, no one spoke. The morning sea was perfectly calm, as though it knew nothing of what the darkness had done. The Argonauts mourned beside the people they had unintentionally wounded. Together they built a funeral pyre for the noble king, and the smoke rose slowly into the quiet sky. Jason carried the sorrow with him as they sailed away. He understood now that courage alone could not protect men from tragedy. Sometimes the greatest grief entered the world without hatred, born only from misunderstanding and the blindness of night. Days later, the Argo anchored beside another peaceful shore, where fresh water flowed from a woodland spring. There Hylas, the young companion of Heracles, stepped ashore with a bronze pitcher to gather water for the crew. He was admired by everyone aboard the ship for his gentle spirit and quiet loyalty. Though still young, he had followed Heracles faithfully, and the great hero cared for him almost as a father would for a beloved son. As Hylas knelt beside the clear spring, the water nymphs who dwelt beneath its surface saw his reflection. His beauty enchanted them. Soft hands reached upward from the water. The quiet pool closed around him without a cry. When Hylas did not return, Heracles went searching through the forest. Again and again his powerful voice echoed among the trees. "Hylas!" Only silence answered. He searched until daylight faded, and then searched still longer. refusing every suggestion that the boy could no longer be found. The crew waited as long as they dared. At last, the sacred beam in the prow of the Argo spoke with the voice that Athena had placed within it. The voyage, it said, must continue. Heracles had other destinies yet to fulfill. The quest for the Golden Fleece was no longer his path. The words settled heavily upon every heart. No one wished to leave the greatest hero in Greece standing alone beneath the forest trees. Yet the will of the gods was clear. With quiet sorrow, Jason gave the order. The oars entered the sea once more as the shoreline slowly disappeared behind them. Many aboard the Argo looked back until the last glimpse of Heracles vanished into the distance. The ship felt different now, not weaker, but more aware of its own humanity. Ahead, another challenge waited, one that no amount of strength alone could overcome. Far to the east, where the known world narrowed into the entrance of the Black Sea, the Symplegades waited in endless motion, the great clashing rocks crashing together with such force that no ship had ever passed safely between them. The great clashing rocks waited ahead, rising and falling against one another, with a force no mortal ship had ever survived. Long before the Argonauts caught sight of them, they heard them. A deep thunder rolled across the sea at steady intervals, as though distant mountains were striking one another beneath the horizon. Each crash sent flocks of seabirds into the sky. Even the waves seemed uneasy, their steady rhythm disturbed by the immense violence that guarded the narrow passage. The Argo drifted to a halt. No one reached for an oar. Before them lay the entrance to the Black Sea, the mysterious waters that few Greeks had ever imagined, let alone sailed. The Symplegades stood like enormous gates of stone, forever opening and closing, crushing everything caught between them. Jason looked from one face to another. No strength could force those cliffs apart. No courage could outrun them without wisdom. It was the seer Phineus, whom the Argonauts had rescued earlier from the torment of the Harpies, who had prepared them for this moment. In gratitude for his rescue, the old prophet had given them careful instructions. "Do not send a man," he had said. "Send a dove." If the bird escaped, though only barely, the ship must follow with every ounce of strength the crew possessed. Jason remembered every word. A white dove was gently lifted into the air. For a heartbeat, it circled uncertainly above the mast before flying toward the narrow opening. The Argonauts watched without breathing. The bird passed between the towering rocks. Then the cliffs began to move. Stone struck stone with a deafening roar. The sea exploded into white foam. When the dove emerged upon the far side, only a few feathers from its tail had been caught. It had survived. Jason did not hesitate. "Row!" The command passed down the length of the ship. Every oar entered the water together. Heracles was no longer among them, yet every man now pulled with a strength born not merely of muscle, but of shared purpose. The Argo surged forward, her hull cutting cleanly through the dark water. The cliffs began to close again. The thunder grew louder. Each stroke became a heartbeat. The sacred oak within the prow seemed almost to lean toward the open sea ahead, urging them onward. Spray burst across the deck as the current seized the ship. The stern drifted dangerously close to the moving stone. Men strained until every muscle trembled. The oars bent beneath the effort. Then came one final crash. The rocks struck together just as the stern cleared the passage, shearing away only the ornament upon the Argo's sternpost. The ship herself escaped untouched. Behind them, the simple gades fell strangely still. Ancient prophecy declared that once a vessel successfully passed between them, the rocks would trouble no sailor again. Their endless motion ceased forever, and the gateway into the Black Sea stood open. The crew rested in exhausted silence. No one celebrated loudly. Some victories invited quiet gratitude rather than joyful shouting. Ahead stretched a sea unlike any they had known. Its waters seemed darker beneath the changing sky. The shores lay farther apart, their forests untouched, their mountains unfamiliar. Villages became rare. Strange birds circled above lonely cliffs, and distant rivers emptied into the vast sea from lands whose names were scarcely known in Greece. The farther east they sailed, the more each sunrise felt like the discovery of another world. Not every welcome was peaceful. Upon a lonely island sacred to Ares, bronze-feathered birds nested among the rocky heights. At first they appeared beautiful as they wheeled through the morning light, their feathers glimmering like polished metal. Then they attacked. Their sharp bronze feathers fell from the sky like arrows, striking shields and splintering against the deck. Jason quickly ordered the crew to raise their shields overhead. The ringing sound of bronze echoed across the island. Others seized their spears and struck them loudly against the shields, while Orpheus added the clear voice of his lyre to the growing clamor. Startled by the tremendous noise, the strange birds abandoned their attack and disappeared into the mountains, leaving the shore quiet once more. The Argo sailed on. Day after day, the eastern horizon slowly drew nearer until, one morning, the lookout standing near the mast called softly across the deck. Land. Not another island. A kingdom. Golden sunlight spread across distant walls and shining towers that rose above a broad river. Behind them stretched fertile fields and deep forests, unlike any the Argonauts had seen before. They had reached Colchis. For so long it had existed only as the destination of stories, the place where maps ended and imagination began. Now it stood before them, real beneath the morning sky. At the heart of the kingdom stood the palace of King Aeetes, son of Helios, the sun god. Its gleaming roofs caught the daylight until they seemed almost woven from gold itself. Marble courtyards reflected bright fountains, and tall columns cast long shadows across polished stone. Yet Jason knew beauty could conceal danger. The Golden Fleece rested somewhere within this distant kingdom, hanging from an ancient oak in the sacred grove of Ares, guarded day and night by a dragon whose eyes had never once closed in sleep. The voyage across the sea had been extraordinary. The true challenge was only now beginning. As the Argo dropped her anchor in the quiet waters below the royal city, Jason drew one slow breath and looked toward the palace where King Aetes waited, already knowing that the welcome awaiting them would demand far more than courage alone. The Argo rested quietly beneath the walls of Colchis, while Jason looked toward the palace of King Aetes, knowing that the hardest part of the voyage had only just begun. The king received the strangers with the dignity expected of one descended from Helios, the sun itself. His hall was bright with polished bronze and gleaming gold, and great columns caught the afternoon light until they seemed almost to glow from within. Servants moved silently between long tables, while guards watched the visitors with careful eyes. As Jason spoke, the young leader asked neither for riches nor for land. He asked only for the Golden Fleece, explaining the oath that had brought him across the edge of the world. The king smiled, though there was little warmth in it. He had no intention of surrendering the sacred treasure that had hung for generations within the grove of Ares. Instead, he offered Jason a bargain that seemed generous only because it concealed the impossible. "If you can yoke my fire-breathing bulls," Aetes said, "plow the sacred field, sow it with the dragon's teeth, and overcome whatever rises from the earth, then the fleece shall be yours." The court fell silent. Everyone understood that no ordinary man could survive even the first task. Jason bowed with quiet respect, though his heart had grown heavy. That evening, as the first stars appeared above Colchis, another pair of eyes watched him from the palace gardens. They belonged to Medea. She was the daughter of Aetes, granddaughter of Helios, and priestess of the mysterious goddess Hecate. From childhood, she had studied the hidden knowledge carried within roots, flowers, herbs, moonlight, and ancient words that few others remembered. She understood the healing plants that grew beneath forest shadows and the dangerous ones that bloomed unseen among rocky hillsides. Nature revealed its quiet secrets to those patient enough to listen, and few listened more deeply than Medea. Until this day, her life had followed a clear path. She loved her father. She served her people. She guarded the sacred traditions of her homeland. Then the gods intervened. Eros, whose smallest arrow could alter the destiny of kingdoms, drew his bow at the command of Hera and Athena, both determined that Jason's quest should not fail. The tiny shaft struck Medea's heart without sound. Nothing around her changed. Everything within her did. She looked upon the stranger from Greece and felt a certainty she could neither explain nor resist. It was not merely admiration for his courage, nor simple fascination with someone from distant lands. It was the beginning of a love that would reshape the lives of everyone it touched. Medea did not welcome the feeling. She struggled against it with all the discipline she had learned through years of sacred service. Again and again she reminded herself where her loyalty belonged. Yet each argument dissolved before the quiet force of her heart. She knew what helping Jason would cost. she also knew she could no longer imagine watching him perish. As darkness settled over the palace, Medea slipped quietly beyond its walls and found Jason waiting where the gardens met the forest. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The night itself seemed to hold its breath. Then Medea placed into Jason's hands a small bronze vessel filled with a fragrant ointment whose scent carried hints of cedar, wild herbs, and fresh earth after rain. "This was prepared with the knowledge of Hecate," she said softly. "Cover your body and your shield before sunrise. For one day, no fire will burn you, and no bronze will easily wound you." Jason understood that this gift carried far more than simple magic. It carried trust. It carried sacrifice. It carried the beginning of a choice from which there could be no return. When dawn arrived, the people of Colchis gathered to witness what they believed would be the stranger's final morning. The great bronze-hoofed bulls emerged first. Flames poured from their nostrils, scorching the ground beneath their feet. Their eyes burned like living coals, and every breath filled the air with smoke. Jason stepped forward. The enchanted ointment shimmered faintly upon his skin. The first blast of fire washed over him, yet the flames passed harmlessly away. He seized one mighty bull by its horn and slowly forced it beneath the yoke. The second charged with terrifying strength, but Jason met it with calm determination until both beasts stood harnessed together. The watching crowd fell silent. No one had expected the impossible to become real. Taking hold of the plow, Jason guided the fire-breathing bulls across the sacred field. Deep furrows opened behind them, and into those dark lines he cast the dragon's teeth, ancient relics left behind by a slain serpent. The earth answered immediately. From every planted tooth rose an armed warrior clad in bronze. Within moments, the field was filled with soldiers who had never known childhood, born fully grown from the ground itself. They lifted their spears and turned toward Jason as one. Then he remembered Medea's final instruction. Without hesitation, he lifted a great stone and hurled it into the midst of the advancing warriors. Unable to tell who had thrown it, the earth-born men believed one another responsible. Their anger turned inward. Bronze clashed against bronze. The field became a storm of confusion until, one by one, the warriors fell by each other's hands, leaving Jason standing alone beneath the open sky. King Aetes watched in growing disbelief. The impossible tasks had been completed. Yet even then, he could not bring himself to honor his promise. That night, while the palace whispered with secret plans to destroy the strangers before dawn, Medea made her final decision. She left behind the only home she had ever known and walked silently through the moonlit gardens toward the waiting Argo. Together, she and Jason crossed into the sacred grove of Ares, where an ancient oak spread its branches beneath the stars. High among those branches hung the Golden Fleece, glowing softly like captured sunlight. Beneath the tree, coiled endlessly around its roots, the great dragon kept its ageless watch. Its golden eyes opened slowly as the strangers stepped into the silent grove, and the cool night air grew perfectly still. The great dragon's golden eyes opened slowly, and the cool night air around the sacred grove became perfectly still. Moonlight filtered gently through the branches of the ancient oak where the Golden Fleece had hung for generations, its golden wool glowing with a quiet radiance that seemed less like reflected light than light remembered from another age. Every leaf stood motionless. Even the wind appeared unwilling to disturb the silence that surrounded the guardian of the sacred tree. The dragon raised its great head. Its scales shimmered like polished bronze beneath the stars, and its watchful eyes had never once closed in sleep since the day the fleece had been entrusted to its care. Jason instinctively tightened his grip upon his sword. Beside him, Medea touched his arm with calm assurance. "This is not a battle," she whispered. "It is a different kind of strength." Slowly she stepped forward. From a small pouch, she scattered sacred herbs gathered beneath the light of the full moon, and their gentle fragrance drifted through the grove. Then she began to sing. Her voice was soft enough to mingle with the rustling leaves. Ancient words carried through generations of priestesses devoted to Hecate. The melody rose and fell like the quiet breathing of the sea itself, neither commanding nor pleading, but inviting rest where endless wakefulness had endured for centuries. The dragon listened. Its great eyes blinked once, then again. The enormous coils slowly relaxed against the roots of the sacred oak. Its breathing grew deep and peaceful until, for the first time in its long existence, the guardian surrendered itself to sleep. Jason looked toward Medea with silent gratitude. Not every victory belonged to the sword. Some belonged to wisdom. Some belonged to trust. He climbed carefully beneath the spreading branches and reached for the Golden Fleece. The wool was astonishingly soft beneath his hands, warm as though it still carried the living spirit of the divine ram from which it had come. As he lifted it free, the grove seemed to brighten around him, and the long quest that had carried the Argo across unknown seas quietly reached its fulfillment. Yet journeys rarely end at the moment of success. Before dawn touched the eastern sky, Jason, Medea, and the Argonauts hurried back to the waiting ship. Sailors loosened the ropes with practiced hands, while others raised the great sail into the cool morning wind. The Argo slipped silently from the harbor. Only when the first light spread across the sea did the alarm sound within the palace of Eetes. The king stood upon the shore in furious disbelief. His daughter was gone. The Golden Fleece was gone. Far beyond the harbor, the Argo had already become a dark shape moving steadily toward the open sea, its oars rising and falling together with renewed purpose. Behind them, ships gathered in pursuit. Ahead lay only the long road home. The return voyage carried a different feeling from the one that had brought them east. When they had first departed from Iolcos, Every sunrise had asked what wonders waited beyond the next horizon. Now each sunrise asked a quieter question. How had the voyage already changed those who sailed it? The sea itself seemed familiar, though the crew no longer were. Jason had left Greece as a young man entrusted with an impossible task. He returned knowing that leadership had never meant carrying every burden alone. Again and again, the voyage had depended upon the gifts of others, upon Orpheus's music, Atalanta's sharp eyes, the courage of the twins, the strength of every oarsman, the wisdom of Medea, and even the guidance of the sacred beam placed in the prow by Athena. The Golden Fleece rested safely within the hold, but it belonged in truth to every soul aboard the Argo. Their course carried them through rivers that seemed to join distant worlds together. Ancient storytellers would later speak of winding waterways, unlike those found upon ordinary maps, where great rivers carried the heroes across lands touched equally by memory and imagination. The voyage home unfolded like a dream whose shores shifted gently with each passing dawn. For a time they came to the island of Circe, the wise enchantress and aunt of Medea. There, away from kings and armies, the travellers paused in quiet reflection. Circe welcomed her niece with solemn understanding, for she saw immediately the heavy choices that love had demanded. Ancient rites of purification were performed beneath sacred trees, allowing Jason and Medea to continue their journey with hearts made lighter, though never entirely free from memory. Then the sea opened once more before them. The stars that had guided their outward voyage returned to greet them overhead. Orion still walked across the heavens. The Great Bear still circled faithfully in the north. Nothing among the constellations had changed. Only the men beneath them, the Argonauts, had left home seeking glory. They returned carrying experience. They had learned that courage was quieter than they had once believed. That friendship was stronger than pride. That the greatest adventures were measured not only by the distance traveled, but by the people one became along the way. Night after night, the Argo sailed westward. Her familiar timbers creaked softly beneath the gentle swell. Moonlight shimmered across the water exactly as it had on the first evening after leaving Iolcos. Yet now every sound carried the peaceful weight of memories shared together. At last, one calm evening, distant lights appeared upon the horizon. Home. No joyful shouting broke the silence. Instead, the crew watched quietly as the shoreline slowly grew clearer beneath the stars. The familiar hills rose gently from the darkness, welcoming them with the quiet certainty that only home can offer after a long absence. The oars dipped into the water with the same steady rhythm that had begun the voyage many months before. The Argo herself seemed to glide with quiet contentment, carrying her weathered crew through the final stretch of sea. The sacred oak in her prow remained silent now, as though it knew that every warning had already been given, every lesson already learned. Behind them lay Lemnos, the clashing rocks, the Black Sea, Colchis, the sacred grove, and every distant shore that had shaped their hearts. Ahead waited familiar land. Above them, The same stars that had watched the beginning of the journey continued their patient course across the heavens, and as the Argo moved gently through the dark water toward the waiting shore, with the Golden Fleece resting safely within her hull, and the sea quietly holding every memory of the voyage in its endless depths, the waves whispered softly against the ancient timbers, carrying the great adventure into silence, where it would remain forever, like a peaceful dream remembered just before sleep.